All right, folks, welcome to the lunchtime session. I'm Girish Bhatt, I'm part of Sumo Logic, and that's Phil Weeks. He's going to be the main speaker today. Today what we're going to talk about is, rather, what Phil is going to talk about is how IHG modernized their security operations during the pandemic. It's really a great success story with the leading hospitality brand known worldwide, and how they're transforming all the way from their corporate strategy of being a cloud-first company and modernizing their security. And that's what this session is all about. It's in my opinion, it's a great example of how a small and nimble security team has not only been resilient, but have actually recovered and done much better than what they used to be before the pandemic. So a little bit about Sumo Logic. We are a small 11-year-old public company. We went public last year. We partnered with AWS 11 years ago, so everything that we do is a cloud-native solution. So we offer security and observability solutions, and we have 2,000 plus customers across the world, representing all major verticals. And we are roughly about 900 plus people with dev teams in Asia, Europe, Americas. And security is a significant part of our business, and that's what we are going to focus on today. So having said that, I know we have a customer speaker today. I'm going to take a quick poll. How many of you have stayed at an IHG property before? Show of hands, please. I know the light is going to slowly come on. I want to say everyone has at some point or other. You'll see why, okay? Okay, having said that, now let's get started. So Phil, who are you and what do you do, sir?
My name is Philip Weeks. I'm a senior technical advisor at IHG. I've been there for about 4 years now. And I come from a background of various technical roles, right? From analyst to engineering, hardware, software. And there's been quite a few industries that I've been in, from construction data to calling card systems and things like that. And then obviously at IHG, I have the ability to run the gamut, if you will, on technologies. And really get my hands into a lot of different things that you really don't think of from a hospitality perspective. So it really is amazing how much technology is used in hospitality, and it keeps me on my toes, right? You're learning something new every day, and that's kind of what I like to do. So that's my background from a technical perspective.
Thank you, Phil. And one thing which we also discovered last night over dinner was both of us started our careers in hardware, moved to IT, moved to other aspects of IT, now called observability, and then security. It's been a long journey, but nevertheless, it's been fun and rewarding. So that was good corporate stuff, Phil. So what's a little unknown fun fact about you that you want to share with our audience today?
So sometimes, if you're working on something technical and you hit a wall, you can't move any further, you can't get past whatever you're confused on or trying to figure out. Sometimes I'll just go work on some of my old cars, get my hands dirty, grease up on some of the old caddies, and sometimes, just change a water pump or something. I mean, they always need something. But from there, it's good to completely focus on something analog and break away from whatever I'm trying to figure out. So sometimes I'll just go, work in the garage for a couple hours, and as I'm doing that, whatever I'm trying to figure out will usually come to me like 4 or 5 hours after the fact, and it's a good breakaway.
A particular type of car?
Cadillacs.
Cadillac, okay. Folks, I've watched movies on Cadillac, the pink Cadillac man, Robin Williams, right? As well as ridden in one, but never had the chance to own one. So that's pretty cool. Anything you want to ask today's audience, Phil?
Are you guys, a lot of people in the audience, are you more on like hands-on keyboard type people, or are you more reporting and analytics and stuff like that?
Show of hands.
Hands for
hands-on folks.
Keyboard. So, really good mix. Okay, good. All right, so hopefully I'll help you.
Okay, so why don't we get started, Phil? This is a short agenda for today's session. So Phil is going to provide an overview of who is IHG and a little bit on their security practice. And then we'll have a conversation on how IHG got started with their security modernization and the critical roles that certain solutions play at IHG. And we'll wrap up and have questions for you. So Phil, why don't we get started?
Okay. Sure. So IHG is a very, like, I love working for them. They really believe in hospitality for good. True hospitality for good is what they say. But what I didn't realize when I started working there is that there's 17 different brands and well over 6,000 hotels globally, 100 different countries. And their loyalty rewards program, IHG Rewards, is one of the largest in the world. And their brands include, Holiday Inn, Hotel Indigo, and one of my favorites is Six Senses. I didn't realize that was an IHG brand. So, a lot of the folks that said, oh, I stayed at an IHG hotel, does seeing some of the more brands change it any? No? Tough crowd?
Probably not.
No, probably not.
Yeah, so I feel, disclosure, I had to look up Six Senses, and I realized that's what I'm going to hit my boss for the next offsite. It's a fabulous, luxurious resort, folks. So take a look at it for whatever it's worth. Okay, shameless plug for IHG here, but nevertheless glad to. It's a phenomenal resort. I hope my boss would sign off for our next corporate retreat there. Someone has stayed there? Awesome. That's awesome. Okay, anything, Phil?
No.
Okay, how about, let's bring it back to security. I know you're a global org. Let's share with the audience what the security philosophy and governance structure looks like.
Sure. So IHG is growing, right? We're trying to grow an industry-leading cybersecurity program. Obviously, we want it to work for everybody within the organization, from the end users to the technical engineers to the analysts, everybody who's doing anything with IHG. We want to make sure that security is front and center. And one of the ways that we do that is by building excellent interpersonal relationships with every different team within the organization. And in some large companies, that is hard to do. So that is something that we've really been focusing on by growing the skills of our organization and focusing on the fundamentals. And what do we mean by fundamentals? It's really every user has a responsibility to do things in the most secure way possible. So it's where we're teaching our users, we're enabling our users, and we're helping all of our users and customers to really leverage that. And in order to do that, you have to make sure that colleagues, they understand their role in supporting security of the whole organization. And that's something that Sumo Logic has helped us phenomenally in doing. But we're pretty much aligning to NIST as a foundation, and then from there, we're moving into some of our own more proprietary programs.
Nice. I really like this slide because it highlights your CISO and the vision that the security team has of strategic enablers. I know you're on the ops side, but it maps to the strategic side. That's the key part, is one of my takeaways from this slide.
Yeah, we're trying to bridge that gap.
Cool. So that's your strategy, and let's look at the team. What does the team look like?
So we have a pretty global team, and we do break it down into several different structures and organizations. Obviously, you've got your legal and things like that, compliance, but then we have our security engineering and architecture team, which is the team that I've come from, and then security, governance, risk, and compliance. That's one of the reasons that most companies have a SIM, is they have compliance reasons for it. And then security operations and threat hunting, that's what we're trying to really push and enable. And then from incident response, hopefully nobody ever has an incident, but if they do, we want to be able to respond to it as quickly as humanly possible. So those are the ones that I would probably focus on.
So in other words, you are associated with the build, manage, and respond
Yes.
aspects of the business. Cool. So that was your security strategy or vision and then overview. And this seems fairly comprehensive. So the first question that people in the audience should be thinking, I had the same question for your team. What is there to modernize?
Everything.
Why don't you walk us through?
Sure. So coming from a legacy SIEM, we noticed that there were quite a few things we just couldn't do. And with the ever-evolving move to cloud, with the ever-evolving work from home, especially with everything that's been going on, there's a lot of things that we've been trying to do. So from that perspective, we had a lot of challenges with our on-premises environment. We were maintaining 700 terabytes of on-prem storage across multiple data centers, all of the network connectivity between them, and quite frankly, we were babysitting our tool set instead of our tool set enabling our SOC to drive the business forward. And what I mean by drive the business forward is to really come in and try to enable the business to be proactive instead of reactive. So unfortunately, the system that we were on, we just couldn't rely on it. Often our engineers would tell us that I'm better off going to the source system and looking locally than looking in the SIEM because it's old and slow, whatever. And our SOC couldn't use the SIEM, mostly because you would run a search and go get coffee, and if you come back, sometimes it just wouldn't be there.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you emphasized SIEM multiple times. So the role of the SIEM, people claim is transitioning away or others. What's the criticality of a SIEM to your organization?
So while we were looking to modernize our security operations, we realized that no matter how we look at it, the SIEM was fundamental to every branch that we wanted to break off of. No matter which way we wanted to go, fundamentally the SIEM had a part to play. And we could not do it with what we had. We knew that we had to get out of the old way of doing it. So obviously, I've already talked about some of the searches failing and things like that. Sometimes, which is the worst thing in a company, we had to reboot the SIEM in the middle of the day. If we had too many analysts that were signed into it, they would run a couple queries and the SIEM would just stop. It would run out of threads. So we would have to reboot it and then wait a couple hours to make sure it caught up and didn't lose any logs, because that's first and foremost for compliance. Then move forward and search with what we're looking for. But Sumo Logic actually helped us get out of break fix, and it helped us to focus on our use cases and enablement, which is something that we were really looking for. And there's the next slide here kind of goes into some of that, in that we had no scalability with our on-prem. We realized very quickly that in order to start bringing in everything that we wanted to, instead of just for compliance, but to really enable the SOC to get all the logs flowing for all the alerts and all the things, we couldn't do it. It was almost impossible. We were already pulling in 500 terabytes of data a year, give or take, and that's with a lot of trimming. And from there, it was just too slow. It wasn't doing what we needed to do. I mean, it is what it is. But
so I have sorry to interrupt you there. You said slower search. So this is something that I've lived through, worked in this space for many years, folks. So can you give some examples of what you mean by a slow search here?
So like a really good example would be a user account locked out.
Okay.
And sometimes it would be where one of our teams would run the query against it to find out, okay, here's the user ID, and let's see, going back 1 or 2 days worth of data just to see. And it would take 2 to 3 hours if it came back.
If it came back.
Right. And that's one of those things that we found ourselves monitoring the platform more than getting out of the platform. We were spending more time really making sure that compliance needs were being met because there was no built-in auditing and things like that. So we had to actually query the system to see if we were seeing logs from the systems we needed to see logs from, or building custom use cases that ate against our search capability because it was too busy self-maintaining, if you will. And of course, we were always in the business of building custom parsers, which, you know, we have so many different systems that it's almost impossible to stay up with that. And heaven forbid we needed to upgrade. That was pretty much the end of it. You know, when you have over 70 different VMs globally just for log ingestion, and then you're sending that data somewhere else, and then it goes into your SIM, then from that perspective, when you have an upgrade or something that has to fix, you really run into this just roadblock of, okay, I have to patch.
Right.
And then here's your Excel sheet with every host, and here's what time it can patch, and rinse and repeat. And it's just not where we want it to be anymore.
Okay.
That brought us to our evaluation process, which brought us to Sumo at the end of a very long and very rigorous process. I believe it took us longer to evaluate than it did to implement. So obviously, a company of our size, everybody has opinions, right? I use this SIM at this company, we use this SIM at this, you know, rinse and repeat. Everybody came to the table with their own thing. And so really what we did was, you know, we worked with multiple vendors to narrow down pretty much from the top 10, and then go in and say, okay, what's best for IHG? What's best for the hospitality industry? What's best for the way that we need to go in and leverage this system? And what we identified from this was what you see in like the 4, 2, 3, 4, 5, et cetera. We knew that we had core capabilities that we needed. So any of you that you know are familiar with Excel, just picture a giant Excel document that's about 50 megabytes in size and has 8 or 9 different tabs. And within each one of those tabs is about 50 different scores from 1 to 5. And that's how we evaluated from all of the different SIMs that are out there, and narrowed that down to a top 5. And then that top 5 came in, and we requested different demonstrations where we told every vendor ahead of time, we need to see at minimum these 88 things presented, right? You know, it has to be there. And so multiple vendors came back and said, okay, we're gonna have to split this into several sessions and things of that. So we were like, all right, we did that. And we ended up with 3 4-hour sessions for 5 different vendors. And a lot of them didn't really want to do it because it's time consuming.
Okay, I have a question. I think I didn't ask you this before, Phil. 3 4-hour sessions, each of them are different?
Yes.
Okay. And that's to cover the 88 demos?
Yes.
Okay.
So we didn't want any bias in the grading process. So within this Excel sheet, each vendor was assigned a number, and nobody, including myself, knew the number of the vendor. And when we did these images and demos with the vendors, we wanted any branding removed from whatever's there to remove any bias that's possible. Because inherently as humans, we have bias. It is what it is. So we just wanted to narrow that down and really bring everything mathematically to this is where you line up. Auditing and reporting, we had the teams were very big on that. Performance and usability was really big to the engineering team because we're tired of babysitting it. And integration with multiple teams because obviously it's a different time. And we don't have that manual labor to integrate everything whenever we want to, right? It takes more planning. So we wanted to make sure that things were really there. And then from support. And I had something on here, but I don't remember it, but that's all right. But yeah. So that basically took about 6 to 8 months to go through this.
The initial part. This is the was it an RFP, RFI, or you had?
This initially was an RFI, request for information.
Okay.
And then we moved over to the proof of value, proof of concept.
Okay.
So we tried to split them all up separately. At the end of the day, obviously, we chose Sumo.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
And some of the things that we liked about Sumo Logic was from the get-go, everything was transparent, everything was clear. Normally, when you get what I call the dog and pony show, when the vendors show, here's our SIM or our platform in a very perfect environment, perfect data structure, perfect, everything is perfect. It's every engineer's dream to have such a beautiful environment to work from.
Staged or test drive, whatever.
Exactly, play in it, do whatever you want. And Sumo Logic actually came to us and said, you know what, is there any way to send us your data? Which we were kind of, okay, let's run it past legal first. But then we came back and said, all right, let's just start throwing data at you guys and see what we can do. And we noticed very quickly your auto-correlation rules within Cloud SIEM Enterprise started working. And some of those were use cases that we had built in already. Some of them were out of the box. But that's one of the things that we really found fascinating was we saw it in the demo, but we also saw it with our data.
Right.
And a lot of the other vendors, they either didn't want our data or they didn't want to show us specifically the way we needed to do it. And part of the headache that we had was coming from a legacy platform that was deeply embedded in a lot of system processes. You can't just break the system processes because you're changing the system.
Right.
You need to build on top of it or with it. And that's something that was very big on that.
So I know you have fast search times. Again, I didn't list it here. So I think in the couple of slides earlier, you said it used to time out if it almost always used to time out at roughly ran for 2 to 3 hours. So what happened with Sumo?
So we had an analyst who was looking at those specific search queries in our former system and looking to bring them over into Sumo Logic or rewrite them however possible. What we found was an out-of-the-box dashboard that we were able to really quickly just modify for a search result. And they came back and created it where when they run the search, it prompts them for the username. They put in the username, and by the time they click enter, they have 14 days worth of data running back for that user if that user was locked out, for example.
Okay.
And what they noticed was, because obviously you're in a transition period, so you're using both systems, they would run it in the legacy system and kick it off later in Sumo. And Sumo would come back within 15, not even 20 seconds before the old system would even register the fact that it was beginning to search through all this data. So that they were very impressed. And anytime that you have your SOC team or your incident response team or even your network engineering team coming to you saying, wow, this is really fast, can we get our logs here? We were like, all right, we won.
So that was one example, 15 seconds versus several hours. And that's for one user. How about, you referred to scalability earlier and you had search tucked in there. So again, whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Backing me into a corner here. So our legacy system was Java-based. Unfortunately, it had fat clients, you know, to the bane of all security people. So basically, if we had more than 5 or 6 people running queries in the core system, if it was running reports or doing anything like that, that was it. You pretty much guarantee that you're going to have to reboot it.
Okay.
Because it would have just run out of threads. No matter how much memory we threw at it, no matter how much CPU we threw at it, it just had its limitations. So from that perspective, that sold SOC on moving everything to Sumo as quickly as they could, because they came in and just really started playing with it. So all these different portions of the business were now coming to the security team saying, hey, we have this search platform that we have on-prem.
Right.
Can we move this into Sumo? Can this work in Sumo?
Right.
And every single time the answer was yes, which kind of leads into data tiering. You're okay for me to go to the next?
Let's hear about data tiering.
All right. So no data, well, not all data is created equal. And what I mean by that is anybody who deals with logs or systems knows that some logs are just inherently chatty and completely useless. Some logs are very quiet and critical. So from that perspective, with the on-prem system that I'm so glad we're off of, like PTSD. The overall problem that we had was when it was designed, when it was built, data tiering wasn't really a fancy thing to do. You either had fast SSD back storage or slower magnetic-based storage. And even then, during a chip shortage, you can't just buy extra storage inexpensively. And from that perspective, we were limited. So when we came in with Sumo, we made sure, and your TAM was adamant with us up front to tier your data and separate it as much as you can up front. But basically, a lot of the logs that are just really, really chatty, and we're really only logging those systems because compliance tells us to do it, and we only search that every now and then for, hey, here goes your compliance requirement, and show us this log from 9 months ago. Infrequent tier is perfect for that. We don't touch the data all the time. We don't have a lot of alerts touched to it. Frequent data is better for other things that, maybe a DHCP log or something like that, that really is important to have, but it's not mission critical. And then your continuous data is where the magic happens. That's where we can send the data to CloudSIEM Enterprise. We can do all these things with it. But when they find an alert, they can search it in continuous, they can search it in frequent, and they can search it in infrequent all in the same dashboard. So it doesn't limit our SOC on how they work.
So for the audience here, Phil, I know we talked about data sources and mapping. We don't want to go there. But if you could directionally give some guidance as to how you would categorize data, right? So maybe authentication data versus firewall data or telephony data, that sort of thing, into these different tiers and associate a business value. I think that's what you're really doing behind this.
Right. So obviously from a telephony system, you would have SIP logs or call construction logs, things like that, that you're not really looking for that in a SIEM, even if it flows. For that, we put that into infrequent. But root logins to those devices, for example, would flow to continuous. So from that perspective, you can separate, even from the same data source, you can say these logs that match this type of event go to this data tier, this one goes to that data tier. And that's a breakup that a lot of competition couldn't do either. It was if it's coming in, this collector or whatever, this is your data tier from that point forward. Whereas with Sumo, we're able to say, once it hits the cloud and we separate it wherever it needs to go, that's when it's tiered. And that's one of the separating factors there too.
So what kind of volume are we talking about? I think you mentioned a number in terabytes at the start.
Right, so we're currently streaming between 1 and 1.7 terabytes a day into Sumo.
Okay. Plus retention for compliance reasons and others, okay. So, and has your consumption gone up, gone down?
Our consumption's gone up.
Because of new use cases.
Because of new use cases and other business portions saying this is really good, let's try to get on this, yeah.
So it helps you stay on budget and use your dollars wisely, I think.
Right.
Okay, let's, I know we had mixed audience here with some buyers, some practitioners, and keyboard folks. I mean that in a positive sense, folks, right? How about value that you and the team derived with using your modern cloud SIEM versus what you had before?
Sure. So we were on our legacy SIEM for well over 10 years. And we were actually able to transition to Sumo in 4 months. That 4 months included 109 rules that our SOC said were near and dear to the business, right? They could not live without these very specific.
And these are operational rules or use cases, got it.
Right. So they needed that, and we had well over 50 different data sources, everything from cloud to custom on-prem applications. But we were able to get into Sumo in 4 months and actually shut down our legacy SIEM and just keep it there for compliance for a little while. But what we really noticed quickly was the out-of-the-box rules that we got within CSE. Once you structure your data and you're sending it to CSE, they automatically start flowing. And our SOC, because of the training available on the platform, while we, as the engineers, were coming together and saying, okay, let's migrate these logs and get this flowing, before we flipped the switch, our SOC was training in the platform.
So in other words, you didn't have to say, come back in a month and then hopefully see some alerts.
Right, no, they had access day one.
Okay.
And they were already logging in and looking for it. And as we started flowing different data types, they took the training associated with the system that they were going to use for that. And from there, we noticed that the automatic insights were starting to fire. And our SOC was starting to use this. So in addition to the 100+ use cases that they brought over from the old SIEM, they automatically started leveraging the out-of-the-box use cases for, I believe, almost 700 now, that they're coming out and saying, okay, the system is identifying this and let's operationalize this. And that was a pipe dream in our old system. We actually came with a 1.5 to 2 year migration plan, and we were done in 6 months.
Oh, wow. Yeah. You typically don't hear a multi-terabyte per day ingest legacy or so-called next-gen SIEM migrating over in a few months. That's awesome.
No, yeah, if you tell any company of our size that you're going to migrate your SIEM in 6 months, they'll just laugh.
And the compliance officer, everyone is happy. Perfect, perfect. I know this slide, folks, came from the IHG team itself. So let's talk about the partnership.
All right. So one of the things that we really appreciated was from the moment we started doing demos with Sumo, the question wasn't, how soon can you cut a check? How soon can you get this onboarded or get this in here? It was, what do we need to show you to make this successful? What do we need to show you to earn your business? And we appreciated that, but basically what it came down to was, whenever we came up with something that was not in the demo or was not identified as something that we wanted to show, our TAM and all of our technical support was really just an email or a phone call away. And that's really helpful when we're rolling something out, especially this quickly. So that's one of the things that we really appreciated. But what really sold us was the trust. Because for me, when we're looking at a consumption-based model, a lot of times where your money or where your credits are going kind of falls behind the curtains, if you will, right? They don't really want you to see that. But with Sumo Logic, when we asked about it, not only were they upfront with that, but they created custom dashboards for us that showed us, okay, this is all of your data tiers, this is how much data is flowing, these are your credits, this is your consumption, and we're proactive about that. And when we were searching our infrequent tier, we were doing it the wrong way. We were looking at it in a way where we were trying to see how much data we were sending to it, but that was counting against our search credit because of the way we were searching. Okay. So they created a different index for us to query that didn't cost us any money. And to me, that was a big win, because a lot of companies would just say, well, it's going to cost you money to search that, whereas Sumo came back and said, well, let's actually make the product better. And we appreciated that.
And so on that example of building the trust, was that over like days, weeks, months? Because sometimes I hear this engagement models with other solution providers, which could take months or quarters. How did that happen with Sumo?
So the trust came pretty quickly when in the demos, the sales engineer couldn't answer some of the questions, and they went ahead and got one of the back-end engineers for the platform and just walked through what we were asking, made sure they understood what we were looking for, and then they explained it to us. So that was very refreshing to have just an honest, here's where things are, conversation with a back-end engineer. But from that perspective, we have conversations with our TAM, and we really make a relationship out of that. But they monitor other things where if we have a SOC analyst, for example, that's just doing an IP query against every single structure that we have, sometimes that query might take more than a minute to come back. And that will be brought up on our conversation with our TAM to say, okay, these searches might be able to be fine-tuned a little bit for better performance, or to understand why we're searching it that way. So that's one of the things, too, with the trust, is that we have that second set of eyes to make sure that we're doing it the right way. Because sometimes we get lost in here's what the business needs, here's what the business wants, but it's also very good to know that the vendor has our back.
Cool. So you talked about value earlier with regards to early hitting your migration targets much early, and congratulations on your promotion as well, well deserved, because Phil, by the way, folks, exceeded his target well ahead of time. So what other parameters do you have of how you report on value as part of your security modernization journey?
So it brought us value because our security operations center is able to operationalize instead of babysit the platform. They're no longer monitoring the platform. They're seeing the events that come out of the platform, and they're making use of that data. They're able to build their own dashboards. They're able to get the training that they need without having to ask for it or having to pay for it. And they can really just make use of whatever they need. In the past, we had the level 1, level 2, level 3, and then certain queries could only be done by level 3 practitioners because of the bottlenecks that the system had. But here we're able to actually empower the level 1 folks to go in there and search and see what they can build, see what they can find. Because sometimes it's the people that are fresh to the organization that might have some of the best ideas. So we really embrace that, but this empowers them. But from a value perspective, the fact that other organizations in the team outside of security are interested in the way we're doing it and what data we can get from there. You have network folks that are using it to look for dropped packets instead of looking in their own firewalls. And to me, those are big wins. They seem like small feats, but they really are a big win when somebody's choosing to look in the SIEM for that data instead of their local console.
Oh, thank you, Phil. So why don't you share a little bit on your onboarding experience? Because I think when we talked about, we were brainstorming topics to share with the audience, you talked about onboarding, training, as part of your time to value.
Sure. So we noticed that we had 70 plus VMs globally that were grabbing logs from different systems. And then obviously being an on-prem solution, we were pulling cloud logs down into our data centers in order to do that. And from an onboarding perspective, we really looked at what we were doing first, how we could improve it, and how we could leverage Sumo Logic, or really whatever SIEM we were looking for, but it ended up being Sumo, to empower us to leverage that data without having to be shackled by the data. And from there, we went in and really just started rolling things out. We were surprised with how easy it was to get logs flowing. When we started sending some of our custom written application logs, which are just gobbledygook text message, right? Those were able to flow in, and we were able to create a very quick parser and make almost the same day, had use of those logs from a security perspective. And that's something that previously would take weeks, if not months, to get a custom parser built on the legacy system and go through and do that. So we really noticed that very quickly when we started sending like Active Directory logs, for example. That was nearly instantaneous. And it's one of those things that you look at the logs and you get tired of seeing them because you're used to seeing them. But when we started sending them to Sumo, it was actually exciting to see that the data was there. Our Active Directory logs were JSON parsed from the get-go. And so what we noticed was the data was flowing. It was flowing quickly. But what we also noticed is we didn't have to do the same calculations for CPU, memory, and things like that. Everything was laid out for us. We knew how much data we were going to send, and we just started flowing data. And a lot of the systems that we had, we were able to send directly to Sumo. Instead of sending it from one system to another, we can send it directly from one of our stacks right into the cloud as native JSON, or you can send it as syslog, whatever you want. And that's something that we really enjoyed, was the flexibility of the platform. Some of our systems are legacy text, and they just write to a daemon, and you have to look through it as multi-line format. And the collectors picked it up almost immediately. All we had to do was say what the delimiter was, and it was parsing. So from there, it was very useful, very quick, and I think that's part of the value is we were so used to the old way of doing things that once we saw how easy it is to deploy this and get it out there, it was just no more thinking involved. We just went and did it.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty cool, right? So you had the number of analysts using the solution now is much 2x, 3x more. What about onboarding, getting started? Because you always hear, hey, moving from a tool A to tool B or solution takes time. How do I get people trained? The taxonomy is different. Can you share your experiences?
Sure. So in our older system, we could only have 5 or 6 people logged into each system at any given time. With Sumo, we have almost 60 people logged in concurrently. And as I said, as we were building it out, they were doing the training. So once they came into the system, they knew how to build the queries. And if they don't, it's just a click away on how to use that. But one of the things that they really like about it is how fast it is and the fact that they can build their queries the way they're comfortable building the queries, and they can do whatever they want with the data.
And plus, they could get started with the training before the deployment was done. You didn't have to wait for anything to get started with the training, right?
Every user gets trained on the platform before they sign into it, just because it's free, and why not?
Right. Yeah, on that note, folks, we encourage anyone who's interested in learning about security. I know it's a Sumo security platform. Whatever, just go sign up and get trained, right? So if you want to, even if you don't happen to be using Sumo today, or I think our training team has like 1-hour sessions, hands-on workshops, as well as certifications. Think of that as investing in your security career or future, irrespective of whether you happen to use Sumo or not. So I think it was a very informative session, Phil. Thank you so much. So folks, there you heard from Phil Weeks, Senior Technical Advisor at IHE, of their journey during the pandemic, of how they started their security modernization, starting with a critical component or solution, that's SIEM. So we're going to be here for a few more minutes if you have any questions. So again, thank you, folks. Thanks to AWS for having us over, and thanks for the folks who came during the lunch time break. Appreciate it. Thanks, folks.